I never meant to notice her like this. Yet the first time she stepped into the kitchen, the air shifted, and suddenly the hum of the refrigerator was louder than the world outside. She moved with a grace I couldn't name, not hurried, not casual, just her. Hair a soft cascade of silver brown, eyes the shade of late afternoon rain, and a smile that didn't need to say anything, though it whispered everything. My heart had a way of noticing the little things. The way her hand lingered on the counter as she poured tea, the faint warmth of her wrist brushing mine when I handed her the sugar, a gesture so fleeting it might have been imagined, but I didn't think it was. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice even, but there was a pause in it, a hesitation that made me lean a little closer than I should have. I wasn't sure if it was the words or the quiet way she studied me, measuring, weighing, daring me to see her the way she let me see her. I'm 24, and I'd been careful not to get caught in the orbit of women older than me. Experience had warned me of the imbalance, but something about her made balance feel irrelevant. She wasn't just older. She was a woman who had lived, who had felt, who had hurt and healed and carried herself like she had secrets she didn't owe anyone. But maybe she trusted me enough to share one. She reached for a mug, and our fingers brushed. My pulse jumped. Not the kind you notice from running or caffeine, it was something else. Something slow and intimate, like a spark suspended just under the skin. I could feel her hand receding, but not completely, like she was teasing the boundary between distance and closeness. I wanted to say something clever, something that would mask my sudden foolishness, but I didn't. I just watched her. Her gaze caught mine, long, steady, and in that look, I felt exposed, like she could read the map of my thoughts before I even knew I'd thought them. She tilted her head slightly, a fraction, a gesture so small yet deliberate, and my mouth went dry. The quiet in the kitchen wasn't just quiet. It was charged, thick with things unspoken, a tension that made the walls seem closer and the floor warmer under my bare feet. "You've been quiet," she said, almost a whisper, but her hand lingered near mine again, the brush of fabric, the subtle scent of her perfume, something soft, something earthy, pulling me closer without words. "I was just thinking," I said, though I wasn't sure what, about her, about this impossible weight of noticing someone so fully, about how she made the world feel too small and too big all at once. She smiled again, that slow, knowing curve of her lips that made me want to ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. And then, just as the moment seemed like it could stretch forever, the sharp click of a door opening outside jolted us. My eyes snapped toward the sound. Her hand twitched, an almost imperceptible retreat, and for the first time in minutes, the distance between us felt real again. Her gaze flicked to the doorway, just for a fraction of a second, then back to me. And in that look, something unspoken hovered. An invitation, a warning, a secret, all wrapped together. I didn't move, couldn't. The world had narrowed to her, the warmth of her presence, the impossibility of the moment, and the question of whether she would let it linger or pull away. And then, someone cleared their throat outside. The door clicked shut behind whoever had interrupted, but the quiet didn't return. The stretched elastic between us. I watched her adjust the teacup in her hand, the faint tremor of her fingers betraying something she didn't say, vulnerability hidden under effortless grace. "I don't usually have company this early," she murmured, almost to herself. Her eyes flicked to mine, just long enough for a spark to pass, then away again. I wanted to reach out, to steady her hand, but I hesitated. She wasn't a woman to be handled, and maybe that was the point. I remembered the stories I'd heard in passing. A marriage that ended quietly, a man who left without ceremony, years spent raising someone else's children while her own needs took a back seat. There was a loneliness in her I could sense without her saying it, a patient sort of ache that had taught her to measure touch and distance like it was an art. I was too young to know all the contours, but old enough to recognize the silence where pain and desire coexisted. And maybe that was why the thought of reaching for her made my chest tighten. Not just desire, it was awareness of something complicated. Social whispers, judgment, the sheer unlikelihood of anyone understanding why a 24-year-old could notice her in the way he did, why she might notice him back. The risk was intoxicating. She moved closer to the counter, and our shoulders brushed. I tried to pull back without seeming obvious, but her hand lingered against my arm, just a breath's distance from fully touching. The warmth that spread wasn't from her skin. It was from proximity, the silent acknowledgement of the gravity between us. Do you ever feel like no one really sees you? I asked before I could stop myself, words tumbling out in a whisper I barely recognized as my own. She froze for a fraction of a second, then exhaled slowly, letting her shoulder nudge against mine in a gesture that was both casual and deliberate. Sometimes, she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. It was enough. Enough to know she understood what I hadn't fully admitted to anyone, what I hadn't admitted to myself. We stood there, teacups warming our hands, the quiet now charged differently. I felt her breath brush against my ear as she leaned forward to reach for the sugar again. A trivial movement, but every detail registered. The scent of her shampoo, the faint shimmer of her perfume, the subtle dip of her collarbone under the soft fabric of her blouse. I forced myself to look anywhere but directly at her, but my gaze inevitably returned, drawn like gravity. And yet, in that closeness, she pulled just a fraction away, leaving the tension suspended. It was unspoken, electric, a delicate negotiation neither of us wanted to break. A glance, a shared breath, a fleeting touch of fingertips brushing as she returned the sugar to the counter. She started, then stopped, lips pressing together, eyes softening. I knew without her finishing that whatever she had almost said would have changed the space between us forever. Instead, we shared a pause, two people acknowledging the pull without crossing the line, the air humming with possibility. The moment ended not with words but with understanding. I knew I would remember the weight of that silence, the press of her hand near mine, the way she lingered and withdrew, and the quiet electricity that promised nothing and everything was possible. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the kitchen floor. I had been leaning against the counter, pretending to stir my tea, though I hadn't touched it. She moved around me, her scent a subtle swirl of lavender and something warmer I couldn't name. I wanted to say something, anything, but words refused to come. Instead, I let my fingers brush hers as I reached for a spoon, a fleeting contact that made my chest tighten. She didn't pull away, though her eyes flicked up to mine, wide, almost startled. Then, a ping from her phone startled us both. She muttered something under her breath and bent to pick it up. The screen glowed with a message preview, and I caught enough to know it was from someone we both knew. Someone who would never understand this, never forgive it. My throat went dry. The intimacy of the moment felt suddenly fragile, exposed. I should answer this, she said softly, the words a barrier and a bridge at once. I nodded, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. My heart was pounding, quick and uneven, like it knew the distance between us wasn't enough. When she turned back to me a few seconds later, her gaze lingered too long, as if the message had reminded her of the one place she didn't want to be. Anywhere but near me. We fell into silence. My pulse filled the room, every beat echoing between us. She moved closer to the counter again, her shoulder brushing mine, almost deliberately this time. I could smell the warmth of her skin under her blouse, feel the tension in the space between our bodies, and for a split second, the world shrank to just her. I shouldn't, she whispered, but her hand found mine again, tentative, testing, wanting, pulling me into a rhythm I couldn't name. My chest throbbed with the desire to close the final distance, to trace the line of her jaw, to feel her lips against mine, but I didn't. Not yet. A shadow of hesitation passed over her face. Guilt, fear, the knowledge that what we were feeling was dangerous, impossible, and somehow irresistible. She glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in and catch us, as if any sound outside could shatter the fragile gravity holding us together. I could hardly breathe watching her, the faint tilt of her head, the way her lips parted slightly as if ready to speak or to kiss. My hand twitched toward hers again, and she met it halfway, fingers entwining for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Our eyes locked, and I swear the world outside the kitchen ceased to exist. The heartbeat, the breath, the brush of our hands, the tension in her shoulder. It all screamed a warning and an invitation at the same time. And then, almost involuntarily, we leaned closer. Too close. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my face, the soft curve of her cheek just a whisper away. She froze for a second, lips trembling almost imperceptibly, then pulled back just slightly, leaving me aching for the fraction of an inch that separated us. Yet the closeness lingered. Her hand remained in mine, her eyes on mine, heavy with everything unspoken, everything forbidden, everything we both wanted but couldn't name aloud. We were closer than ever, even as we tried to resist. The evening had crept in silently, shadows pooling in the corners of the living room. I couldn't remember the last time the quiet had felt so loud, so weighted with what we weren't saying. She stood near the window, the last streaks of sunlight catching her hair, making it glow like it held its own secret fire. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance that had tormented me for days, weeks, maybe longer. Every glance, every brush of her hand, every near touch had been building, and now I felt it press against my chest, heavy and insistent. "You've been avoiding me," she said, voice low, a tremor I hadn't noticed before threading through it. Her arms were crossed, but not defensively, more like she was holding herself together. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I'm not avoiding you," I said, but the words rang hollow even to me. Her gaze softened, and then something in her shifted, an almost imperceptible tilt of the head, a weight leaning toward me that made my pulse spike. Without thinking, I stepped closer, careful, hesitant, aware that every millimeter between us was charged with impossibility. "Do you know how long I've tried not to notice you?" I whispered, my voice low near her ear, feeling her inhale sharply. Her hair brushed my cheek when she turned slightly, and I reached up, almost against my own control, to sweep a strand behind her ear. The silk of it against my fingers made my pulse thud like a drum in my chest. She leaned into my touch, just a fraction, enough to betray that she wanted it too. My hands trembled, caught between restraint and need. Every rule, every reason we should step back, crashed against the simple, undeniable truth. I wanted her. Her lips parted slightly. "You're reckless?" she murmured, though there was no anger in her tone. Only the barest trace of warning, and something else, something desperate. I laughed softly, a little breathless. Maybe I don't care anymore." My chest tightened as I watched her eyes flicker. The subtle flash of fear, desire, and curiosity all at once. She took a step closer. I could feel the warmth of her body now, the steady beat of her pulse under my fingers when she hesitated, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the vanilla of the room. My hands hovered near her shoulders, itching to settle, to pull her closer, but instead they trembled in the empty space between us. The air between us was a storm held in suspension. Every inch of space seemed alive, charged with everything we hadn't dared speak. And then she tilted her head, eyes half closed, lips so close I could feel the heat from her breath brush my own. I wanted to close the gap, to lean in and cross the line we'd both circled for weeks, months. My heart hammered, every instinct screaming yes, but the world outside, the weight of consequence, the mere thought of it, held me just a fraction away. She whispered my name, soft, urgent, and in that single sound, everything broke and built at the same time. And I leaned closer, closer than I ever had, and the world narrowed to the point where our lips could touch with the faintest tilt, the edge of a kiss that could undo us, or save us, or both. Then, a sudden knock at the door jolted the room. The knock at the door had barely faded when her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, and I saw her eyes widen. Just slightly, a flicker of something unreadable. She turned the screen toward me. "It's my ex," she said, voice clipped but uneven, the words trembling as if she hadn't expected to admit them aloud. He's coming by." I felt my chest tighten, a rush of something hot and sharp twisting through me. Anger? Jealousy? Desire? Couldn't name it. My hands flexed at my sides, fingers brushing against each other in restless friction, my pulse hammering in sync with hers. She stepped closer, almost seeking support, almost warning me. Yet her shoulder brushed mine in the briefest, accidental touch that made my breath hitch. The air between us shifted. Safe no longer existed. Every inch we had carefully navigated together now teetered on danger. I didn't expect. I started, then stopped. The words meant nothing. The truth was, nothing I could say would change the pull I felt toward her. The way her nearness made me ache. She exhaled, a small, unsteady sound. I didn't want to tell you, but you should know. He never really let go. Her hand hovered near mine, brushing my wrist in a gesture that lingered far too long, electric and intimate. I wanted to pull her fully into me, to close the distance, but the world outside our bubble reminded me that we weren't alone. I caught the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she shifted her weight toward me and then almost withdrew. It was a push and pull that mirrored my own tangled feelings. Desire and hesitation, longing and fear. I wanted to tell her not to worry, that I didn't care, but my voice caught. I did care more than I wanted to admit. Does this change anything for you? I whispered, leaning close enough that my shoulder brushed hers. The words were weak, but the heat in my chest made them feel monumental. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips parted, and I felt the pull again, stronger than ever. A confession hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. She wanted this, wanted me, even if the world said we shouldn't. I could feel the tremor in her hand again, small but real, the way she leaned into me just a fraction, searching for support, connection, permission. My own hands itched to touch her, to anchor her, to feel the warmth of her against me. Instead, I let my fingers trace near hers, just brushing, just enough to ignite sparks without letting them fully leap. The tension was unbearable, sensual, sharp, and urgent. The risk made every inch between us more charged. Safe was gone. What we had was raw, real, and dangerously close to breaking every boundary we'd set. And then, without a word, she pressed her palm lightly against my chest, the heat of her skin searing through my shirt. Her gaze held mine, steady, bold, and I realized there was no more pretending. Something had shifted. I swallowed hard, caught between the impossible and the irresistible, and I knew a choice had to be made. Retreat, or finally let everything fall into place. I didn't step back. The evening had settled into a hush, the world outside the apartment fading into a blur of streetlights and distant traffic. We stood in the center of the living room, mere inches apart. I could feel the heat of her body through the thin fabric of her blouse, smell the faint trace of her perfume, the warmth of her hair brushing against my cheek as she leaned slightly closer. Her eyes searched mine, wide and unguarded, and for the first time, I saw everything she had been holding back. Longing, fear, hope, hesitation. It was all there, reflected in the tilt of her head, the subtle tremor of her hands, the shallow breaths that seemed to match my own. I don't know if I should. She started, voice low, almost trembling. Her fingers hovered near mine, uncertain, as if deciding whether to reach out or retreat. I shook my head softly. Don't think. Just be here. My words were barely a whisper, but they carried all the weight of what I felt. The world beyond these walls didn't matter. Not judgment, not expectations, not the impossibility of it all. Only this moment mattered. Her hand brushed mine, tentative at first, then with a little more certainty. The spark that had been building for weeks flared and held us suspended in time. I could feel her breath on my cheek, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she drew closer. My hands hovered near her shoulders, my fingertips itching to settle against her. But I waited, letting the tension stretch. I've wanted this, she admitted, her voice catching, eyes locked on mine. The confession hung between us like a delicate thread, pulling tighter with every heartbeat. I swallowed, my chest tight, my pulse loud in my ears. I've been waiting too, I said, voice low, careful, but not restrained. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Desire, longing, frustration. The weight of all the unsaid moments we'd shared. Slowly, impossibly, we closed the remaining distance. Our foreheads touched, our breaths mingling, the warmth of her body against mine grounding me in a way I hadn't thought possible. I felt the tremor in her hands, the subtle pressure as she leaned into me, as if testing whether I would meet her halfway. I did. Nothing was sudden, nothing was perfect. It was messy, human, fragile, and yet unstoppable. Every inch of space between us evaporated, every pause and hesitation giving way to understanding. And in that quiet, suspended moment, we didn't need words anymore. The electricity that had danced around us for weeks, every glance, every touch, every near miss, found its release not in a single act but in the acknowledgement of it all. I could feel her smile, small and knowing, against my chest. She exhaled slowly, and I mirrored her breath, our bodies pressed together, a rhythm forming naturally, without need for explanation. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty, hesitant, or uncertain. I felt seen, fully, completely, without compromise. And from where I stood, I knew she felt the same. Everything that had been dangerous, complicated, forbidden, even thrilling, had finally found clarity. We stayed like that, quiet, close, human, understanding each other in ways that words could never reach. The night had softened everything. Shadows melting into corners, the city quiet beyond the windows. We sat side by side on the couch, knees barely touching, hands brushing until finally one hand found the other. Fingers intertwined with a slow, careful certainty, as if mapping the space between us had taken weeks and would take weeks more. She leaned into me, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of her hair, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the subtle weight of her trust. For a moment, I didn't need to speak. Words had been overused in our story already. Now silence carried more meaning than any confession. I wasn't sure if any of this could happen, she said softly, eyes half closed, lips curved in that quiet, knowing smile that had haunted me since the beginning. You mean us? I asked, my voice low, careful. She nodded, her hand tightening just slightly over mine. You're different than I imagined. Better, in a way I didn't think was possible. And maybe that's what scared me. I laughed quietly, a short, breathless sound. I've been scared too. But maybe some things are worth the risk. My thumb brushed over hers, slow, reassuring, and the space between us seemed to shrink until it didn't exist at all. We shifted closer, a natural, unspoken gravitation. Her forehead rested against mine, the contact light but grounding, a promise without words. I could feel her heartbeat, steady now, and mine mirrored it, racing in a rhythm that belonged only to us. I never expected this, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. I tilted my head, brushing a soft kiss against her temple. Neither did I admitted. But I'm glad it did. For the first time, the age difference, the judgment of the world outside, the hesitation and the long-held fears, they all dissolved into something warmer, human, undeniable. We were here, together, and the impossible had become ours, not perfectly, not without mess, but fully and real. She laughed softly, a sound that filled the room with light. I guess we just needed to stop overthinking. I grinned, brushing her hair back behind her ear, careful, reverent. Maybe, or maybe we just needed to be brave enough to feel it all. Her hand squeezed mine, slow, deliberate, and I held it in return. We sat like that, side by side, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's body, close enough to share every heartbeat without a single word. The night stretched around us, soft and full, a quiet affirmation of everything we had fought for and finally allowed ourselves to have. Eventually, she rested her head back against my shoulder, and I pressed a gentle kiss to her hair, long and lingering. We're here, I whispered. Yes, she replied softly. Finally. And in that simplicity, touch, warmth, presence, we found a clarity and a connection that neither time, fear, nor hesitation could undo. Speech Balloon, did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?